Hey everyone, welcome to the show, So You Want to Become, and I'm your host, Krishna Ranganathan. Today we have with us a surgeon whose skill is matched by his commitment to his patients, Dr. Ajit Pai. He's a senior consultant and surgical oncologist at Apollo Hospitals in Chennai. Not only that, he does his surgery using robots. He's treated thousands of complex cancer cases using advanced robot techniques, and his journey started right here in PA Senior Secondary School.
Yeah.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, yeah, let's start. Let's go back to those PS days. Like, how did your journey begin in PS? What motivated you to become a doctor, become a surgeon?
So I think I actually spent only the last 4 years of school in PS. So unlike a lot of my peers who started from lower kindergarten, I entered quite obliquely late. I came over from another school. So my experiences, it took me a long time to get used to the system, for me to find my feet within the system. Now, regarding medicine, the seeds I think were sown very early because I'm a third generation doctor. So my grandfather was professor of medicine at Madras Medical. My father trained as a surgeon from Madras Medical. And it was always there on the cards that I possibly would become a doctor. Now, I must thank my father who really never pushed me into medicine, but he said, it's a great field. If you choose to go, we'll all be very happy, but it's something that you have to love. So to some extent, it's a calling. You kind of know that you are destined for medicine or not. And it's very polarized, or all or none. You either love medicine insanely or you're just going to hate it once you enter medical school if you haven't done it for the right reasons. So for me, I think it was about my father, the smells of the hospital, the smell of the spirit which used to be in the old days, the medical books with illustrations, the stories of patients doing well after surgery, which kind of, I think my father was a romantic, and I also kind of ascribed a romantic ideal that it's like a fairy tale, right? You come, you're a knight, you have certain knowledge, you help people who are sick. That kind of a romantic ideal appealed to me a lot. And when I entered, I think, school and we started doing dissections and things like that, I used to look forward to it. A lot of people would feel squeamish. I would love dissecting the specimens and even dissect other people's specimens like frogs. So I knew I had a natural ability or talent for that, and I would love to do it. And I think my biology teachers saw that, especially Miss Hannah Charles, who was a biology HOD at that time, and she kind of encouraged me that medicine might be a good fit for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Dr. Hannah. Teacher Hannah Charles.
Yeah.
What else did she inspire you to do so? Like, for example, did she push your inspiration further, such that doctor should be becoming a doctor first thing was being considered by you further?
I don't think very actively, but she was a very kind person. That's what I remember. So I think, the most important thing I find when I remember people or think about people in the past, competence is fine, academic brilliance is fine, but the people I remember the most are the ones who are kind, right? Who went out of the way to be nice to you because they felt that here was somebody who was worth mentoring, but kindness is what it was. Because I was from another system. I came into a CBSE, I was in a matriculation system, and, I kind of, couldn't find my feet for the first year or so. So she was very kind and encouraging because she saw my potential. And in fact, she was one of the people I reached out to even after I got my medicine, and used to come frequently to meet her on the weekends, even after I was a medical school student. So I think it was her being kind and encouraging that, you can do better and you can keep pushing yourself. And there was never a time when I could not reach out to her or a question which would shirk from answering, right? So she kind of, I think, put me on the track that biology is the right fit for you. You are incredibly gifted with biology. The natural progression is into medicine. This was something which she made me see that that's the light at the end of the tunnel. So it was very important because my father was there, of course, but he was already an established surgeon.
Correct.
He was too far ahead of me. So he could not possibly know, me being generations apart, whether medicine would be the right fit in today's day and age, because he trained 40 years ago. She was somebody who was obviously not a contemporary, but somebody who had seen real world scenarios of people passing out and becoming doctors. And she definitely felt that I had the spark to become a doctor.
Many students wonder why become a doctor and then a surgeon. You chose your path to become a surgical oncologist. What drew you to it?
So I think once I entered medical school, one of the rites of passage in the first year, the moment you enter, is anatomy dissection, which is basically you have cadavers, dead bodies, unclaimed bodies, for example, or people have donated themselves for medical science, and they're placed in formalin tanks. And every day the body is taken out. It's quite gory because you take it out with a hook and somebody has to put it on a table, and then you start dissecting and you continue dissecting till the body is done with. So when I started dissecting, and we have a textbook called Cunningham, which is a Bible for anatomy, right? It's Cunningham's Manual of Dissection. So I used to love dissecting. I used to go to other people's tables and dissect for them. I was very good at it. In fact, I became the anatomy gold medalist. I was the best dissector of my batch. So this was something I knew that I liked the precision of dissecting tissues, taking things apart and putting it back in a better form, which is basically what surgery is. So surgery is a very mechanistic and mechanical kind of act, but it's also something like art or sculpture. So that's why you say, medicine is both a science and an art, and surgery is the highest form of that. So when you watch a surgeon in full flow operate, it is like listening to a concert pianist, or I would imagine seeing a Michelangelo painting or a Da Vinci's, a painting, the Adoration of the Magi, or one of his great paintings. So it speaks to you, right? So this was something which appealed to me. And the fact that you could treat a person in a few hours and rid him of his pain or her of his pain and cure suffering very rapidly compared to medicine, which takes a long time to act, appealed to me a lot. And also the form and structure of the human body, which is incredibly beautiful, right? To see it in a living person and get that person off out of anesthesia and bring him back alive or her alive is incredible. And the fact that we are privileged, every day I take it as a blessing and a privilege that I'm allowed to do this to somebody. It makes me very happy. So this is something which drove me towards surgery. Cancer surgery is a very advanced form of surgery. So we have cardiac surgery, we have neurosurgery, which are very narrow specialties. Cancer surgery is a little more broad-based. So it builds up on all the things I learned in surgery over the years and allows me to refine it to a next level.
Sir, so you trained in India and then you went abroad, like Chicago.
Yeah.
So how has your experience in abroad changed the perspective of surgery or oncology?
I think I was already well trained because I trained from very good places, including Tata Memorial in Mumbai when I went. I was already a seasoned surgeon when I went for my training. I did 3 fellowships, one in Japan, which was mainly for liver and pancreatic surgery. And so that experience was the Japanese are very hierarchical. So there is a guy on the top. Typically, it's a male-dominated country. And there are a lot of people below them. So each one of them has to put in their time, say 10, 15 years before they can go to the next level. So the man on the top does incredibly well, but not everybody reaches that, right? But the level of surgery is unparalleled. The precision is unparalleled because they take a lot of time. They take 40, 50 years to reach that point and they're okay with it. So a guy in his 60s and 70s will be operating like virtuoso, but he's taken that much time to reach. So Japan was incredible to know to what level surgeons can operate, and they are the best surgeons in the world. The Japanese are the best. I mean, no one in the West can even compare or come close to the Japanese. Then I went to Germany to do a pancreatic fellowship to see how the Germans operate because it's a very different school of training. Germans are brutal, efficient, not beautiful like the Japanese, but very efficient and very good at the work. And they compress time. They're super efficient. So what a Japanese surgeon will take 8 hours, they will do it in 4 hours and do it twice over. And you can see the cars, right? The BMWs and Mercs. They're incredibly efficient machines. And that's what I learned from the Germans. How to be very efficient, how to run systems to a T, how to be out of the hospital at 4 o'clock, how to have a life outside of work, which they value a lot, how to take your weekends off, but also do as much work as somebody who takes double the time. So that was Germany. But USA is where I really flowered, So to take an analogy, what I used to think or, what I learned is, I felt I was like a Kenyan runner. The Kenyans train at high altitude. They train in the mountains. So when they come down to the ground level, the sea level, they become super athletes. They're used to training in low oxygen altitudes. So the Kenyans train like 2,000, 3,000 meters above sea level. So when they come down to the plains where the Olympics would, they're super athletes. So I felt I was like that because I was so well trained and the system was very democratic. Only merit. Doesn't matter where you're from, what's the color of your skin, your gender, neutral. In the hospital, you are treated on your merit. And I was very well treated, So I could ascend very rapidly through the ranks. From day one, I was operating. And the surgeons who trained me, they were from the Mayo Clinic, which is like the top hospital. The guy who trained me was from the Mayo Clinic. So I learned a lot of things very rapidly. I would say I would learn almost 10 times as what I would have learned in a year in India. The other thing was the altruistic philosophy.
Sorry?
That altruism.
Altruistic, okay.
For example, I will teach you everything I know. Because one day you're going to go away 10,000 miles away and operate, and somebody is going to ask you where you trained from, and it'll all come back to me. That's very powerful, because it's very rare to find altruism in people who teach, especially in medicine. So medicine is a very closely guarded field. There's apprenticeship. You learn a lot by watching, but a lot of learning has to be on your own. There are very few people who actually take the time out to teach you independently. So this is something which I found that altruism was very refreshing. To quote Dr. Prasad, We train people because we will find a person who will go far beyond us. And the only way to find that person who can make a quantum leap is to train everybody who comes through your hands. I found that was the most important thing I learned from the US.
So students, I mean, as a person who has no idea about robotic surgery, and when I think of robotic surgery, I think of it as a very, very advanced science fiction.
Yeah.
So in simple terms, what is it? So does the actual robot operate on its own? Or?
Yeah, that's some common misconception because we've all seen movies like iRobot and, we have Blade Runner and all kinds of iterations of that. So the robo here is basically it's computer assisted surgery or CAS. It's like driving a car. You take the most sophisticated car. The moment you turn off the ignition and press the start-stop switch, the car stops. It can't run independent of you. Of course, we have driverless cars, but here we're talking about the normal car which we put an ignition or put a start-stop. So the moment you put the accelerator, it goes fast. Put your leg on the brake, it stops. You change the clutch, whatever. It has a set of controls which only you can control. So robo is like that. It is a slave robo. It has no independent capacity for thought. It can't learn how to do the operation. So you dock the robot to the patient, it can't start doing the operation without you're not there. And there are multiple fail-safes. So the moment you sit on the console, the robot gets activated, but only when you move your fingers and the joysticks, it will operate. The moment you stop, the instrument has no capability, it is dead and lifeless. So surgeon uses the robot as an interface to do better quality surgery than he or she could do without the interface of the robot. Like using a computer to solve a problem. You could probably solve the problem, it could take you maybe a day. Maybe the computer can solve it in a few seconds. Right. But only you can input the computer to solve the problem. That way, I would say. So there are robots which are becoming, which have artificial intelligence capabilities built in, but they are not ready for human use yet.
So the bots are self-learning. Like as you operate with them, they learn.
Yeah. But those are not available for commercial use because again, who's going to be the first set of patients who would agree to such a surgery? Who takes responsibility if the robot kills a patient?
Correct.
Is it the robot? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the surgeon? So a lot of gray areas and a lot of medicine is about ethics. Even a transplant, for example, somebody gives a part of liver or kidney. There is an ethical problem in that. What happens if the donor dies?
Correct.
Right? It has happened. So that's why cadaveric programs are so big in the US. In India, cadaveric programs are not so well fleshed out. We have living people donating. So a lot of gray areas in medicine, So more than the technology and the expertise, it's about what is right in medicine. Lot of ethical areas, gray areas, and you can't have actually gray areas in medicine, right?
Correct.
It has to be black and white. So that's why we're at
the moment uncertainty picks in, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and somebody makes a profit.
Have you seen how useful it is with patients and what makes it an exciting career to you?
So I think eventually the proof of the pudding is what is the patient experience and the patient outcome. You may do fancy surgery, but if it doesn't help the patient, then it's just a tool, gimmick or a marketing tool. So what we find is with robotic surgery, which is basically surgery through smaller incision using better instruments. It's logical that it will benefit the patients. But the actual real world things is apart from smaller incisions for the patient, which means less pain and obviously better cosmesis. So let's say you're somebody, let's say you're a police officer, right? You have to be very physically fit. With a long cut in your belly, you're going to take 6 months off work and never going to come back to being normal, right? Let's say you're training with your fellow colleagues, you have to be bare-chested or bare-bodied, when you're training. It is a stigma, because everybody wants to know. Here you can barely see the scars after a few months. So you are able to go through surgery with very little stigma or collateral, which is very important in a lot of professions. You're a model, you're an actress. Obviously it matters, right? Because the external beauty, which is the key thing we look for in movies. Other thing is that less blood loss, less complications. It's a finer operation. You have better vision, you have magnification, so you can do a more precise and finer operation than an open or a laparoscopic surgery. For cancer patients specifically, because the recovery is so fast, they can start therapy like chemo or radiation much quicker. So when they start quicker, their survival is going to be better. The earlier you start your therapy after surgery, the survival is going to be better. So all of it put together, it's a more gentle operation, a quicker release from hospital, earlier getting back to work, and for the surgeon who sits at the console, his useful life is extended. Standing and operating is quite strenuous. Sitting and operating is much better. So if you can do an operation comfortably, your useful life is going to be much, much prolonged compared to a surgeon who stands and operates all the time.
What keeps surgery interesting to you? Even after so many years, what does it change and what keeps it interesting to you?
So if I understand right, you're asking about what keeps me from burning out, right? That's what you're basically. So burnout is a term which is used quite a lot in every profession. So what I understood in medicine specifically, and for me, is burnout is never the result of too much work. Okay. If you love what you do, there's nothing called too much work. Or in fact, there is no work. It is not work at all, right? What is burnout is coming to work every day without a sense of purpose. In the sense, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? At some point, everything we do in medicine, like in any profession, becomes like automation. I can close my eyes and go in and do an operation because I've done it thousands of times, right? Different kinds of operations. So surgery is not really it's not really something which I dread, like we used to do in the training. Like, it's difficult. Am I going to be able to perform? You're like an elite athlete or sportsman. You can just been doing it so frequently that it's a given that it will go well. But what is the purpose, So what I find very interesting and very refreshing as I'm growing older as a surgeon and maturing is the patient story. Who is this patient? He's a priest. Okay, where is he from? Kanchipuram. Just to quote a patient randomly. Or is he a police officer? Or today I saw somebody who was a fire service marshal. Okay, so what is his financial background? Is he able to pay for the operation? Who's his immediate family, right? How many children does he have? You understand? So I'm getting now a kind of story of this guy. I'm saying his wife needs treatment for cancer. He's somebody who is committed to serving us. He's a fire service marshal, or maybe he's in the armed forces. We need to go out of our way to help this guy, right? I'm in a position of power where I can pick up a phone and make the surgery at half the cost, right? And it's very doable. So it's not charity, but you're helping somebody just by picking up a phone call.
Giving back to the community.
And you have the power to do it. And I do it every day. Of course, there are patients who will pay for their surgery and they have insurance. Everybody's very happy, right? But there's a person who's struggling, who has 2 kids. Now, can we reach out? Can we help them? And I feel very privileged that I'm in a position of power where I can do something for this person, which may not look like a lot, but it's just a lot for him. So I find purpose every day. Patient story. Why is the patient struggling? Why is this patient contentious? Why is this patient belligerent? There is some story always, They're all frightened. They're all sick. Nobody wants to be in hospital. So how can you make that experience better? So finally, it's the human connection, I watch them, I learn from them, and it makes me a better person. That's what my purpose is.
In medicine, what's that one quality do you think is very important to develop? In medicine or any demanding career?
I think one is perseverance, right? You never give up with it. The other thing I think very important is discipline. You have to have discipline, right? You have to go after something. There is a particular amount of, penance that you have to pay. Whether getting up in the morning at 5 a.m. to do something, or, going to the lab and doing something, or going to the wards and studying patients. There is a discipline which has to be, enforced. So perseverance is required, which means you keep trying till you perfect it, and discipline. So what I like, the quote which comes to mind when you talk about discipline is what Mike Tyson said. So Mike Tyson says very famously, discipline is doing what you hate to do like you love doing it. He said that's what makes Usain Bolt or a Mike Tyson or whatever. You hate doing it. Nobody wants to get up at 5 and train. Nobody wants to get in the pool like Michael Phelps. Nobody wants to spend 20 years becoming a surgeon. But you do it like you love to do it. And then it becomes easier. So that discipline is very important. Other thing I read somewhere and I heard, and of course a lot of people tell me things also, as you do. We keep interacting with so many people at different, very well-connected people. So we get a lot of information which is relevant to medicine, and I try to import it into my discussions. There are only 3 things which are relevant in anything, and especially in medicine. Or why do you want to be a doctor, or whatever it is. What do you want from life? How badly do you want it? How much are you willing to suffer to get it? Right? So this will solve most of your problems. If you're not willing to suffer enough, it's not what you want.
So ask these 3 questions when you want to do something.
Yes. So these 3 questions you have to answer. You want to be a doctor badly? Yes. Okay. Everybody says that because it looks glamorous. You're feted by society. Obviously, it looks very glamorous, obviously, medicine. How badly do you want it? Now, the cookie is falling, right?
Correct.
It's tough. You have to go through your preparation, hours of study, sleepless nights. How much are you willing to suffer? Are you willing to sleep on floors, go without sleep for days, without food? All of this was going to happen at some point, right? When you're treating a patient, you're not thinking about food and sleep. You're going to have 36-hour shifts. You're going to be dead on your feet. And then you have to again go into surgery. That's what your penance is. But if you do it for the right reasons, you will obviously come out on the other side.
So we head into the rapid fire round. And what's the one myth about robotic surgery?
that the robot does the operation. Obviously, it doesn't. It's just a sophisticated computer with no brain of its own. It's a slave robot.
Okay.
I do the operation. Yeah.
Okay. One teacher from PS you would thank today.
There was an English teacher called Chandra Vedachalam. She was very, very influential in terms of being a mentor. She taught me a lot of my love for English and my command of the language comes from her. She used to give me a lot of books of Somerset Maugham. Things we didn't have access to books that time, right? They were very expensive to buy books. We used to go to small pokey libraries and borrow a few books. Pages would be missing. She had a huge trove of books and she used to share it with students with the knowledge that some of them may not return it, right? And we just loved her. So my command of language, I feel command of English is very important. It enables you to read fast. Your memory is also better. So I found that my ability to read and understand medical literature and medical books was far ahead of my peers. I could read 2 or 3 times faster, and all of it I feel goes back to my dad, of course, who was extremely a man of letters, and the English teacher, Chandra Vedachalam. Yeah.
Okay. One invention that changed cancer care.
I think it would have to be understanding the biology of the cancer and the understanding that it is not just surgery which cures the patient, but you need to have things like chemotherapy and radiation. So the understanding that cancer is not just a local disease, that it is already kind of spread by the time it's discovered, and the use of chemotherapy to contain cancer has made patients live much longer than they would with just surgery. So I would say surgery is important, but the fact that there is a hidden world beyond that where cancer cells lurk, which need to be destroyed with drugs known as chemotherapy, is something which has changed the face of cancer care forever.
Best advice you would give to a student who loves biology?
I think do vast amount of reading. It's a very democratic world. You have the internet, so read a lot of biology. Read about people who have done a lot of work in biology. Not necessarily literature which reflects on biology. If you're interested, go to a hospital. Maybe in your summertime, between 11th and 12th class, for example, go visit a hospital, go visit a clinic, see what it is that actually people in medicine do, if you're interested in medicine. If it's molecular biology, go find labs, go to IIT, do a project, get into it, because you will find sometimes it is not for me. It's also important to know it's not for me, because all of us have this romanticized idea that this is what I want to do. You might want to be an engineer or you want to be a doctor. Go and talk to somebody who's actually walking the path, and then you may find, this is not the right fit for me. It's very important to know beforehand by talking to people who are already ahead of you. Apprenticeship with somebody, in your free time, in your summer holidays. So, for example, my daughter, who's just finished 12th, she's come and watched a few surgeries. She's seen blood. She's not, she feels happy, that she's watching somebody get better. The sight of blood is not nauseating to her. It's very important. Because you can't be a doctor if your pinprick is going to put you off. So Correct. It's important to know that this is the right field for you because you venture, because these are very long paths, right? You can turn back, of course, but why do it if you already know that it's not the right path for you? Very important apprentice with somebody who's further down the path than you. Maybe talk to students also who have entered into medicine or molecular biology or biomedical. Find out what were their thoughts when they entered and is it the same as what they think it was when they entered. Talking to people ahead of you solves a lot of problems.
Always beneficial.
All of us need a mentor.
Correct.
You have to choose somebody ahead of us. There are plenty of, and that's why the school alumni group is very good, I feel. We can connect to a lot of people now, and because of WhatsApp and other things and social media, it's so easy to connect to seniors and find out what was their path, what are their struggles. Not like in the old days where, you have to physically go and meet a person, pick up a phone, a landline, and make a call, like, back in the days.
It's not as strenuous as it used to be.
It's not. You can shoot a message to somebody. Most of them will respond. You'll fix a time. You can just pick up a call, do a Zoom call, whatever works for you. And you have your information half an hour that, okay, no man, this is what I need to do, or this college I shouldn't go to, or this course is really not great. Maybe I should look at this other option, right?
As we come to a close to this episode and as we celebrate 50 years of excellence at PS Senior Secondary School, what's one message that you would like to give to your fellow alumni and current gen students?
I think don't stop believing in yourself, right? And dream big. You're always meant for the stars. So don't set your ambitions low because you will achieve it, right? So dream the biggest dream you can and collaborate with people to reach there. Don't dream small. Whatever you think of or whatever somebody has achieved, that person is just another human being, right? You can do it. So I think the importance of being in a vibrant community and being part of alumni association and things like that is knowing that some of them are done exceptionally well and knowing that you're all the same. right? You're all born with the same platform. So all of you can reach that level. If somebody went to Harvard or somebody did something really incredible in life, it's possible for you to do it too. So don't set your sights low. I mean, dream big, and and believe in yourself. And the sky is the limit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you here.
Pleasure. Thank you.